There are certain personal or professional learning tasks that involve things like amounts. They may involve ingredients. They may involve procedures. And so today on the Magnetic Memory Method podcast, I am delighted to be joined by David Curtis, who has a long history of understanding memory techniques and using them, and he's been part of the Magnetic Memory Method world for a number of years, and he shared with me a story of how he was able to improve his existing knowledge of using memory techniques to memorize drinks that are involved in his work as a mixologist. And mixology is when you really take making drinks seriously. So I'm absolutely delighted that David spent this time with us to share some of his insights and how that he thinks about them in his own mind. Because everybody needs to interpret the wisdom of the ancient memory tradition in their own way, and even the magnetic memory method winds up going through your own mental procedure to make it your own. So this is a wonderful discussion about how he did that. Now, briefly before we get into the conversation, we just dove into the deep end and we started talking about things like the major system. And if you don't know what that is, I just want to take a minute to pause upon it. And if you do, then of course you will absolutely love taking time to share with others what this is, because it is kind of like a common lingo that we use amongst ourselves. And the more people have it, the more they're going to have an easy time memorizing how much volume of a particular ingredient needs to go in whatever cake you're baking, whatever drink you're mixing, or whatever thing you need to do where numbers are involved. And later in this interview, we talk about how numbers can be used to memorize foreign language vocabulary as well. So the major is the path into that. And very briefly, what you do is you turn consonants into numbers, or you link numbers to consonants. There's many ways to think about it, but at the end of the day, you just have a little mental system, and it takes different people different amounts of time to learn it. I learned it quite quickly because I put the associations in a memory palace. And basically what you do is you have 0 associated with an S or a soft Z or a Z, and you could use all of those interchangeably. You have 1 with a T or D, 2 with an N, 3 with an M, 4 with an R, 5 with an L, 6 with a sh, ch, j sound, 7 with a K. Sometimes you use a hard G, which we'll talk about in this interview. I usually don't, but you can. And 8 is with an F or V. 9 is a B or P. That's it. And I know it sounds like a mouthful and to be like, how am I going to learn all of that? But you can, and you can learn it very, very quickly. But it's one of the most useful things that you can do, and it can later be developed into a 00 to 99 PAO. Anyway, I wanted to just set the stage with that because we talk about using these systems for numbers, and later David asked me about whether he should use a 00 to 99 PAO based on the major. And I say, yeah, you should, because, some German came up, because he's also a language learner who's learned some German, and we use some German words, and I show him how you could use this number system to memorize a word like one of the German words that comes up in our discussion. So, without further ado, we're going deep into David's career as a mixologist. It's really, really fascinating, some of his experiences and his insights, because he talks about organizing things in exactly the way that I talk about it in the Magnetic Memory Method, but he's translated it into his own wisdom, which is exactly what you need to do. So find this as inspiring as I did, please, because inspiration is what we really need to get more people using memory techniques in a way that I think is absolutely going to make for a better world for one and all.
One thing I've always had an interest in is memorizing cocktails better, because just listing the ingredients isn't enough. Every single ingredient has a specific amount involved with it. So I was struggling for quite some time trying to figure out exactly how to modify each of the ingredients to represent how much is in that, how much of that ingredient is in the drink.
Right.
So what I did was I wound up going to Georgia for about 6 months and taking several jobs. I happened to have had a hernia at the time, and I couldn't pick up heavy things off of the floor. I could still work as a bartender, though.
Right.
And the problem was that I kept getting new menus. Every place I would work, I'd work there for 3 weeks or a month, and then I'd get let go because I wasn't able to perform. And then I'd get another set of menus, food menus and drink menus, to memorize all of their drinks and all of their food. And I kept moving from place to place, and it was overwhelming because there was so much to memorize. And I realized I had to come up with a way to memorize the precise amounts and do it quickly and make it foolproof. And I finally figured out how to do that by creating container objects.
Right, right.
So, for instance, if I had a half an ounce of coconut syrup and a half an ounce of pineapple juice in a drink, I would use a hatchet as a modifier. So I'd put a hatchet in the pineapple and a hatchet in the coconut, and I would see half of an ounce because each one is chopped in half. But I found out that some of my drinks would have 5 or 6 half ounces of something, uh, like for instance a sangria would have a half an ounce of lemon juice, half an ounce of simple syrup, half an ounce of pineapple juice, half an ounce of lemon juice, 1 ounce of orange juice, 1 ounce of brandy. And so I had all these hatchets all over the place. And I was becoming confused. And it was very hard to remember because there was so much more. But I figured out that if I created an object that acted as a container, I could place several different ingredients into the container. And by doing that, I only had to remember one thing in my narrative. And so when I would, for instance, make a canoe, originally I wanted to use something that would represent a half of an ounce, and I decided that a canoe would work because the little cover that goes over the hatchet looks kind of like a canoe. You know that little rubber thing that's on the end of the sharp edge? Some places sell them that way. Or the
I,
little leather sheath.
well, one of the things to ask really is, I've only ever been a customer at a bar, and
Right.
I've served, or I've been a cashier at a liquor store very briefly, and I had to get some sort of special license to work with alcohol in that regard. But I mean,
Yes.
what are the stakes in getting this right as a person who creates the drink for people? I mean, it sounds like it really needs to be tickety boo, or
Well,
else they're not happy.
well, that's true. Each drink has to taste exactly the same as the last. If you go in with 5 people and each person's having a different drink, and each drink has 5 to 7 ingredients, and each person has 2 to 3 drinks, you don't want each drink to taste differently. You want every single drink to taste the same as the last one they just had. And also, you don't want to have to look at a recipe book every time you have to go back and look up a drink, or go on the internet and Google the drink, because sometimes a different page will show up first in Google and you'll get a different recipe.
Right, right.
So, so the thing is to work more quickly. You can make twice as many drinks as the other bartenders who don't know the recipes if you don't have to look them up. And that's where it's such a great thing to be able to use a memory palace and to station each station represents a drink name, and then within that station there's a narrative at that place, at that location.
Right.
So that's the way to create that whole uh, the whole scene. And then, as you yourself said, what you're going to do is you're going to be the director of your own story, of your own play. You're going to go back in there and change things around so that they work better the next time, and eventually refine that. I like to I like to do perfect mnemonics where they're so strong that and they fit so perfectly together that they're impossible to forget. And that doesn't happen a lot, but sometimes it does, and it's a great thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we could talk about that. I mean, there is this interesting part of using mnemonics, which is that it's not bulletproof. It's not exactly magic, but it gets quite close to that realm, but never quite entirely completely. So it's given you an edge, which is one of the reasons we're talking about today. But
Yeah.
how do you feel that you navigate that? I mean, you've got to have the drink be perfect, and yet mnemonics are almost never going to be perfect, but they're good enough, and they got good enough for you that you started to
That's
turn it
right.
into a practice.
Well, sure, because I use the major system, but I also use person object action, or person action object, PAO. I use acrostics. I use everything that I can possibly put together
Mm,
and do it as a unified system as best as I can, so that I'm able to get everything in there, and it just works. I especially like the major system because I'm able to remember the numbers and very specifically. But my objects themselves aren't part of the major system. They're they're just objects that I have assigned a numeric value to or a fractional value to. And if it's 3/4, I'll use a tree because the tree is the 3. And originally I had a little spigot sticking out of the bottom of the tree trunk. So it
Mm,
would be water. So it'd be 3/4, tree
right.
water. And then I just decided I don't even need to do that because the tree is actually a container object. You can put things in the tree. I decided to use things to represent the most common ingredients in the drinks. For instance, SpongeBob is yellow, and so I use SpongeBob as lemons or lemon
Mm,
juice.
right.
I use the Hulk because he's green, he's a lime. I use a monkey, or actually he's a gorilla or a monkey, as simple syrup because there are these little plastic monkeys that look like S's, and you can link them together, and it's a toy. So I use a monkey as simple syrup. And pamplemousse is grapefruit juice, is grapefruit in French. So I use a mousse as grapefruit juice.
Right.
And there are all sorts of ways to remember what ingredients are. One of them is agave syrup, for instance. And in, in Mexico, it's called magua. And magua reminds me of Mr. Magoo, who was the cartoon character
Right. Right.
who's half blind, you know. So I have Magua and the Hulk in a canoe. So it's a half an ounce of agave syrup, a half an ounce of lime juice, and they're holding up a cup of grapefruit juice because they're making a paloma out of that. And a paloma is grapefruit juice. It's actually grapefruit soda and tequila, but at the place I'm working right now, we're using grapefruit juice
Right.
and a little lime.
Amazing. So you just grabbed the core techniques and ran with it and just make it work.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the whole process, is to be able to find something that will work for you as that container object. For me, total cereal was 1.5 because it's T for 1 and the total for 5. But the point I just decided to assign the second T to.
Okay.
So total. So a box of cereal, any kind of cereal, represents 1.5. So I can have an ounce and a half. I just have a box of cereal with a goose's neck sticking out of it, and I know that's an ounce and a half of Grey Goose. Or I have a friend named Henry, so Hendrick's gin would be 1.5 ounces of Hendrick's gin. And most of my ingredients have already gotten some kind of an object to represent them as well. So I actually have a really nice narratives going on there between all of these different objects inside of their containers, which are part of the action. So
Right.
SpongeBob, SpongeBob is inside of this canoe, which I've converted into a Viking ship. And he's holding up a cup with some lemons in it. The thing is, I use a cup because I realize I can use that can represent 1. It's not an actual cup, but that's going to be 1 ounce. It can be 1 ounce. I was using a tie, but a tie is not anything you can do any action with. It just hangs,
Mm,
you know. So, but I figured out, well, a teacup is just 1. So
right.
anything I put in that teacup is 1 ounce. And I have a friend named Dieter, German guy. So anything with a German hat on it is going to be 1.25. But I can turn that hat upside down and put things in that hat.
Right. Right.
You know,
Cool.
so that worked. Yeah,
Yeah.
that worked.
I mean, this is the ideal. You're making it your own by taking action. And I instantly hear tie, you can't do anything, and it's just like, well, that's what I used for Alataya. So Weird Al Yankovic is
Oh yeah,
doing stuff with a tie, and Alataya is the ancient Greek word for truth, right? So like everybody kind of processes this in their own mind, and if you can't,
exactly,
if it doesn't make sense to you, then you just leave it, and it might make sense to the other people, which
exactly. Yeah,
is just always, we all have our own little story with it, which is why I kind of jump on that one.
yeah. That's why it's an art, and people,
Right.
everybody's going to do it a different way. It's mainly the thing I think that it's all about the process. and how to do it and how to formulate what it is you want to memorize, not necessarily to say, okay, take what I have meaningful to me and use it for yourself, because it's not going to be as meaningful most of the time, and just do something that'll make sense to you. And that's the best part about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it excites me. And I wonder, you shared a little bit about, your early story. And I wonder if we could talk about that a bit. Because I wonder if there's like a common denominator amongst some people being a little bit more willing to play with it and experiment with it, that maybe has to do with our background. Cause I have a couple similarities with, that doesn't sound as dramatic, but Harry Lorraine also had some situations that he talked about like that when he was a kid. So I don't know if you're happy to dive into that.
Well, yeah, this was the thing I talked to you about the beatings I would get and so forth when I was at school. Yeah, I would be given 5 minutes to study a specific amount of material. I would actually ask for help to study, and instead of being given any kind of help or guidance or assistance, I was sat down at the table, and an egg timer was set to 5 minutes, and I was told I had to learn this material in 5 minutes, which would have taken at least a half an hour of hard study to learn. And I kind of went through that my whole life, academically, and I knew I had to do something to improve my memory. So I actually went to school, and after school, I'd go to the library every day and look up books on memory and see what I could find out, if there was anything I could do.
Right. Where do you think you first sort of got it, understood the techniques, and realized their use value?
Well, when I was about 16, I think, I found Harry Lorraine and Jerry Lucas's book, the memory book, and I I think it was about halfway through that book or towards the end of the book, because they were going into the major system, and I was struggling to remember the 100 keywords. Tai Noah Ma Rai Law Shu Cow IVB Toes Dot Tin Tum, and I was really having a hard time memorize. I was struggling with that, and then it suddenly hit me: why am I trying to memorize them? Why don't I just associate them?
Right.
And it became extremely simple. Then I just turned it into a little story. There's a tie around the neck of Noah, who's standing next to Ma, who's eating a piece of rye with my dad, who was at the time a police officer, so he was law. And then there was he had a shoe with some made out of a cow, and he was standing in some ivy, and suddenly I just had this whole thing all the way up to disease. And I memorized the table in a day or so, I think it was. And after that, then I started using it to convert license plate numbers. It took me I would say it took me a year or so, but I was already applying it all the time, as much as I could possibly, because I really was very excited about it. I learned quite a bit. And of course I was going nuts I had to memorize every detail of everything, and that was a lot of fun.
Right.
So.
Well, that's great. Yeah, I mean, linking that list is great. For people who aren't listening, I mean, disease is 100. I'm assuming because of one
That's right.
being D and the two S's would
Yeah.
be is those two
Yeah.
S's.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So that's kind of cool, and it's kind of cool that those of us who use those techniques, we have that common second language. This, we could guess what other people's images are. Like if I say that Tess of the Dubervilles is my 100, then you would probably be able to guess why that is.
Yeah.
Right. Because,
Absolutely.
yeah. So it's great that you found, your way through that hang up. And I just always trying to get at the psychology of, like, what do you think it is that pushed you forward? You noticed the table is there, you're not getting memorized, and then you go, why am I not associating it? Whereas so many
Yeah.
people would just go, well, this doesn't work, I'm done. And then, it just becomes the book becomes an artifact on the shelf. Do you have any insight into how you pushed forward and made that happen?
Well, I think it was merely taking it very seriously, because I had to do this. I just knew I had to, and also perseverance. Just bullheaded, or bulldogish kind of hanging on and continuing to try and making it work.
Right.
I knew it would work. The science is there, there. Once I saw the associations were working like that, I immediately knew that it would work for me, and all I had to do was keep applying it and see how far I could take it. I know you learned how to speak German, and so did I taught myself in 6 months. Every single day, I divided the dictionary up into pink, blue, and yellow. Um, Mondays and Wednesdays, I would study the pink words. So I would
Right.
keep my genders all together,
Oh, I see.
And yeah, so I would be able to wouldn't mix up the gender of a word as much. I thought if I kept kind of grouped them together when I was learning them. And then I had the tables with gingen, zayen, za, gezayen, erziet, and so forth,
Yeah,
all
yeah.
of the verbs. And I put them on this loop cassette as a sleep cassette, which is not exactly mnemonics, but I was listening over and over and over. And it would turn itself off an hour after I went to sleep, and it would turn itself back on again an hour before I woke up. So I would get that started, and then going through just using the mnemonics in general for memorizing all the vocabulary and the rules of grammar, doing everything I could, and then my company went on strike for about 2 months, and that's when I spent total immersion. I was like completely immersed in the last 2 months, so I got a great big boost out of that. And then I started to fly over there a few times and speak it with the native population, and it got better each time I went.
Wow,
So
sehr gut.
that's yeah, genau. And so
Genau.
that's how it works. You know how it works. It's something everybody out there who's listening needs to take very seriously. If you do take it, if you practice every day and go through your rehearsals, I use. I don't just use the memory palace. I use my index cards, uh, and I'll write down the location of each one of the stations on the card as
Right.
well.
Mhm.
If I want to refresh that, and I find it's a lot easier in bed, going to sleep with my eyes closed, to run through the memory palace, and I don't have to turn on a light and grab a card.
Right.
Uh, and the same thing, even I know you said don't if you're driving, don't go through your memory palace when you're driving because of the imagery, but it doesn't get in the way as long
No.
as I'm not on the highway.
Well, when I lived in Germany, I was always on the highway, the Autobahn.
Oh yeah, that's right.
That's probably where that advice came from because I'm going like 130 kilometers an
Oh
hour.
yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. It is fun. But that's
Yeah,
why I didn't use that. That's probably where that advice was coming from.
yeah,
Uh, cool.
yeah.
Okay, so I don't think I've ever tried an experiment where I put on a tape loop for language learning and then a waking up thing. You recorded your own voice or you used
Yes. No,
okay.
I absolutely recorded my own. This was actually in the days when there were the cassette recorders.
Mm,
And I went to Radio Shack, which is now out of business, but they had these 6 minute audio cassette loop cassettes. So I could record quite a bit of information on a 6 minute loop cassette. And I bought a book by a guy named David Curtis, which is not me, but
not you,
another. This is one of the reasons why I bought the book. I said, "Oh, this guy's name is David Curtis," and it was called Sleep Learning.
right?
And I thought, okay, let's see if that makes any kind of sense at all. I'll buy that book and try it out. And I think it did help quite a bit, actually. I wouldn't exactly call it sleep learning, but it would be more like becoming familiarized with the rhythm of all of the different verbs. And then when I studied them during the day, they would sink in a lot more quickly. I think it was a very pleasant experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I have done things where I've recorded my own self hypnosis or auto hypnosis,
Yes.
and certainly put myself to sleep listening to my own voice and just interacting and engaging with it. But I never thought of doing it with actual language learning. So I can imagine it has a benefit.
I would say if I think it's better if it were something like verbs, especially if they're regular verbs.
Mm.
Although some of them were irregular and they work just as well. So I think that was the only thing I ever used it for.
And were you doing any kind of conjugation or?
Yeah, well, of course, because it's part of the if you got the I think it's the Langenscheid's verb table books with 500 verbs, or 1,000 verbs, whatever the number is, and then go through that book. You'll just see they're already um, divided up like that.
Right. Yeah. Well, someone was just asking me today, like, did you ever memorize conjugation tables? And I was like, no. I mean, and the reason why I would just go from infinitive would be because I'm just reading, writing, and speaking the language. I mean, it's not that I never looked at conjugation tables, but just the general rules for regular and irregular. Because there was so much reading, writing, speaking, and listening going on, it almost just rubs off, and you start to observe what those rules are. And
Right.
sometimes you have to look things up, but as a general matter,
Yeah. Well, exactly. This is, I think, the best thing people can do if they're going to learn a foreign language is to find a book that they've read in English or whatever the native language is more than once.
mm,
I chose Tolkien's trilogy. I'd read it already 10 times in English.
right.
And I actually, it was more than that. And I decided I'm going to read Tolkien's trilogy in German.
Mm,
So the translation, even though I would say, what is that word? I don't know what that word is. I wouldn't have to stop and grab a dictionary because I knew what the word was supposed to be.
right.
And then I could read the whole book. And now I download books from Audible. And there's a filter in there in Audible where you can select languages, and I'll choose the German language and just get the books by the authors that I like and be able to listen to all of the German novels that way, or whatever information I download.
Yeah, you might get a kick out of this. I've done that too. Like I got 1984 in German, but I got a DDR version, and
Oh,
like they changed that stuff, believe it or not.
that's funny.
But it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting to be able to not only read it but see the changes that they made. Um, so, and I also at one point had some math textbooks from the DDR, and I mean it's crazy. They would have exercises like how fast does a bullet travel to destroy capitalism? Or I'm not saying that right from
No,
memory,
no,
but
that's funny though.
it's just like those math things. Like if a train is traveling at
Sure.
300 kilometers an hour and there's four passengers that slow it down by a cubic measure of this and that and the other thing, it would be just like instead of that kind of thing, it would be like how fast is a bullet facing this much resistance in the wind to destroy capitalism being slowed down, and it would be missing numbers. It was just bizarre. But anyway, yeah, reading in German can be great, and especially if you get some of that historical stuff going.
Love that. Yeah, that's funny.
So yeah, that's a good strategy, especially as you say, if you know it really well. And that's one of the reasons why I gravitated to 1984, because I had read that so many times that you could just kind of guess, which I'm glad you raised that, because one of my favorite Latin textbooks, they talk about reading whether even if you don't understand it and practicing what they call anticipatory thinking. So
Wow.
merely by trying to guess what something means, you're starting to learn better, according to them, which maps onto what's called active recall in memory science, which is, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but active recall is basically trying to solve the puzzle
I
without
think
an answer.
that's what children do, though.
Yeah, but guess
The
what?
tabula
I mean,
rasa.
I don't know where that I can improve in this area, but I think I've been screaming at the top of the hills for over a decade now, saying, take off all the adult filters and let's play with these images, which is again why I'm excited to speak with you. I mean, I don't think I've ever
That's
drank a canoe, and I don't know exactly what a hatchet
good.
is, but
Right.
when you say those words, I'm just playing with them already, to
That's funny.
so that's the thing. Do you feel like you're more you have more dexterity in like turning off the adult critical filters and just getting
Oh
into
yeah.
play, or
No, you sure, absolutely. I remember I read a book called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind,
right?
and in that book, the Zen master says to take all of that stuff off the table. Think with the mind of a baby, of a newborn, and everything is flashing into the present because you have no past.
Right.
Everything there is flashing into the present, and you don't know what's going to come next. So your life is not tethered to the past. That's gone. All you can do now is the present moment, and what we're seeing is the future flashing into the present all
Right.
of the time. So at that point, that's the beginner's mind. But in Carlos Castaneda's books, he wrote about a Yaqui way of knowledge, and in those books, he said that the brujos, the witches, the male warlocks, were teaching the student not to think with words.
Mm.
And that's actually helpful for me to not have to dress up or filter anything through a dictionary, just to see it as it is and realize it as it is, as if it were brand new. And what can I do with it? How can I change it? How is this flexible? Um, Instead of relying on a definition that's already been given to it.
Right. Right. Well, yeah, that immediate experience, childlike play is great to be able to do. That's what Tony Buzan used to say. He said the kid is the perfect artist and scientist. They would pick
Yeah.
up the piece of paper and like taste it, which is like, experimental test. And then they would get the pen and
Yeah,
just, start to do art.
that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That's great. Castaneda, he's quite an interesting cat. A lot of
Yeah.
controversy and so
Yeah.
forth.
Yeah. Sure. Absolutely, debunked and all of that, but still, I don't know. Some of the stuff he wrote just made so much sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is that it's a story about someone learning to not have so many filters, and there's a yin yang kind of aspect to it, which is the absolute terror of what it's like to see a dog, drinking and seeing the whole digestive system, or however,
Yeah.
you work through water through your body. And then the glory of seeing pure becoming, just as you say, the past flashing into the future, and the present is somehow just what we are, as we
Yeah.
navigate that passage. So that's a really great way of thinking about it.
Yeah. It's like
Every
we're a point of light moving through all of this time.
mm, yeah. Well, maybe we could talk a little bit of shop when it comes
Okay.
to a little bit more close detail in the drinks and the measurements and all that sort of stuff.
Okay.
When you're doing it, just maybe take us through a little bit of a process. A new drink, and you need to memorize it.
Okay.
Where do you start?
The Tiki Teeny. Okay. It's the Tiki Teeny. That's the name of this drink. And what it is a half an ounce of lime juice and a half an ounce of coconut juice. And the way I do that is I put the canoe on top of a van. And I'll tell you why it's a van. It's because there's vanilla vodka. All right. So
Okay.
I put a canoe up there, and the old song, Put the Lime in the Coconut, is
Right.
playing. So I hear that. So I know it's a half an ounce of lime juice and a half an ounce of coconut syrup. And inside of the van, there are two green chairs. And that's a green chair, coconut, rum, liqueur. So there's 2 ounces of that. And then there's also a baby car seat with a pineapple in it. And the pineapple is just a little baby pineapple crying, is wailing his lungs out. So that's 3/4 of an ounce of pineapple juice. And the van itself, there's 1 ounce of vanilla vodka in there. So that represents the entirety of the cocktail. It's in a martini glass because it's called a teeny, so that's easy to remember. And it's got a graham cracker crust rim around the martini glass, and that I remember simply because the van is crashing into a big graham cracker and making it break apart like that. So for me, it's simple to remember all of those ingredients, um, and make that drink. And the same thing with all of the drinks that I have. They all have a little story to them. The first thing I do now is I group everything together. I'll look at the entire recipe, and I'll group all of the ingredients that are half of an ounce together, all of the ones that are 3/4 of an ounce together, all of the ones that are 1 ounce together, because they're all going into the same boat, so to speak. They're all going into the same container object. And
Mhm.
I may have 3 container objects. I can use the tree is already 3/4, but so is a baby carriage. Because if you look at a baby carriage from the side, it's got that rounded bottom, like a semicircle, and then the top part that comes up to shade the child is the other quarter. So it's 3/4. So I can put things inside of that. I'll use an object that is I can use a car seat because
Right.
that's also for babies. I don't think of my recipes in words anymore because I find that if I have to translate the ingredients into words, it takes more time to go over them.
Mm.
Um, and so the way that it's done is you just take the elements and place the ingredients in there and then have them interact with each other. Try to have some kind of action going on. I find that having something that's living, that's the person action object, that helps the most. And I discovered that on my own a long time ago, that if there's action involved and people involved, it's a lot easier to remember than just inanimate objects stacked up on top of each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. What about procedure? So if you have graham crackers that need to go around the rim, I mean,
Right.
I don't know, but it's just imagining making such a thing. That's probably the first step. Uh, but maybe not. I like, are there drinks where there has to be an order to things or,
Well, yeah, actually, that is one of the most important things I think to do when you're memorizing is to be able to picture the glass that it goes in, because that's going to be the first thing you need to go for
right?
before you go for any of the ingredients. And if the glass is rimmed like that, it's important to remember that. But I don't have a specific method for memorizing. Like there's no particular plan. Rimming is not such a big issue. It seems to I can remember remember to do that on my own without having to use a mnemonic for that.
Is it the kind of culture where there's new drinks coming on the market all the time that you have to learn, or is there just
Well, yes, in a way, I work in a classic cocktail environment right now, but all of the liquor distributors, every single company that distills liquor or owns distilleries, Pernod Ricard, and let me see, there's a big Diageo, the British concern, who owns over 200 distilleries. They they all come out with brand new recipes all the time for marketing purposes, and a lot of them are, they're flash in the pans, and they don't last very long. But every time a manager orders or gets another bottle of something, they have to come up with some new recipe. The distributors give them recipes, and then we get the recipes, and we have to learn those.
right,
And
right?
it's really kind of annoying. In some cases, the drinks are good, but a lot of times we learn them and nobody ever orders them.
Oh wow, that must be a
That's
little
life.
frustrating.
That's life.
Yeah,
Sometimes, but you'd be surprised. Even I'm surprised, though. Occasionally, sometimes it could be months or even a year goes by, and then all of a sudden, people are asking for that one drink, and it's not even on the menu anymore.
right. Wow. So that seems like an interesting challenge to always sort of keep up with whatever's going on there. Uh,
It's a lot of fun. It's practice.
right. Do you find that you you have to test yourself to see whether or not a drink is up to par, or is that something that has to be decided externally?
No, no, it's possible. As a matter of fact, it's one of the industry recommendations amongst the most serious mixological minded bartenders that you have to take a sip with a little straw. Just put the straw in there, pull it out, and take a sip, just to see what that tastes like. But that's only once, maybe when you first make it. But
Right.
after that, you're already following the recipe. There's no reason to do that anymore. But the thing here is, this is really interesting. I was taking these part-time jobs on weekends. I was working a regular bar, but I would also pick up another day when I had my days off, doing different conventions and at the zoo. and they would give me these Halloween and other holiday drinks, maybe 7 or 8 of them, each one having 7 ingredients a piece, and each one with a specific amount of liquor in them, of each liquor. And I would only have about 20 minutes with this stuff alone, with the written thing. I would take a picture of it on my phone, and I would make flashcards and memorize them as fast as I could using this system that I devised. And I was actually able to make these drinks that day, the next day, and the day after, just by memorizing them for that original 10 or 15, 20 minutes. And nobody else was doing it. Everybody was bringing their drinks to me saying, "Can you fix this? This is terrible." And I got to work with the manager who made the drinks. She created them, and she was pretty impressed. So this system does work.
Right, right. Well, in terms of all your experiences with the different mnemonics and so forth, is there anything in particular that the way I'm teaching it helped that you could share with others that may encourage them to either
Absolutely.
get into any mnemonics or the particular magnetic memory method approach?
No. Your magnetic method is absolutely outstanding. I can't begin to thank you enough for all the work you've done and are continuing to do. And I am absolutely delighted that somebody has finally come forward and is doing exactly what you're doing. I have nothing but gratitude to you, and you are amazing. Anybody who wants to learn mnemonics, they have to go to you. You talk to all of the industry experts. You know all of the scientists. You bring them on. You have excellent podcasts, and I I have a whole list of people like and books that I've read from based on your recommendations, and they've been very helpful.
Oh, well, that's great. Great to know. I wonder what do you think is really the thing that you would advise anybody who's either sitting on the fence, they want to explore mnemonics, or two lines of advice, really. They're sitting on the fence, they want to start mnemonics. What do you think would mentally nudge them to take that leap of being like a kid? And then if someone is already on the path and they're struggling a little bit, what would you advise them to do to just keep going?
I would say probably thinking like a child is very important, because you do have to be flexible in your imagination, and don't go along with all the rules that everybody gave you. If you were a child and used to scribble on your paper and they told you not to do that, don't make drawings, don't draw those little arrows, don't make doodles. Get back to doing that again. Start doodling. You don't have to be good at it,
Right.
and don't criticize yourself. Just as long as you can understand it. If it helps you remember even a little bit, just keep working on it and develop it.
Right. Yeah. Here's one of my drawings from when I was preparing for level 3 in Mandarin.
I love it.
I wouldn't even call it a drawing. It's a chicken scratch, but nonetheless, it helps. I know exactly what that means. And I myself don't have the answer on any of my cards, precisely because of that principle we were talking about, anticipatory thinking. What must that mean? And it helps it form the memory so much faster because I don't
I
cheat.
like.
Like I have to figure it out, or at
I
least
love it.
try. At least try.
I think I actually love the idea that you're doing the Mandarin Chinese. I think it's terrific because they use pictograms. The whole thing is pictograms. It's almost like they practice going to school in the morning by drawing um, the images in the sky with their finger, and they're seeing pictures of things. And I think that really is an aid to memorizing in and of itself.
Yeah. It really is. It's one of those things where I can imagine if somebody said, "Hey, you have to be a bartender tomorrow," like my initial reaction would be total overwhelm. Like, you mean I have to know that this has a half ounce and this has 1 ounce or 3 ounces or whatever. Like, it's just. But then once you pluck into it, just like you've described, actually, if you put all the drinks that need 1 ounce together in like one Mary Palace or one container, you're
put them
just using
in a big teacup.
right. Yeah. And you're just giving yourself this like advantage, which is what I've always taught with magnetic memory method. in an alphabetical way. Put all the A words together in one A memory palace. So you're just
Yeah.
reducing one thing to think about, oh, that's where the
And,
A words go, sort of thing.
and
So
I memorize. And when I do a memory palace, I reorder all of my drinks into alphabetical order. It
right.
just helps to know, well, what's the next drink, and if I can't think of it, it'll help a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit, you don't have to do it this way, but it's a bit similar in characters, because there are sound components in some characters, there are meaning components in some characters, and so forth. And if you just take a little bit of time to arrange them in a way that the most language programming most language courses or books don't do, then
Yeah.
you can give yourself a little bit of an advantage, because you can create a bridging figure based on like a sound component or a meaning component or what have you, right? Image component.
Yeah.
And you just organize them, and then you go a little bit faster because a bridging figure can walk you through from one to the other. Mandarin, you can also use just the alphabet, because Mandarin has pinyin. And so you just take all these P words and, you stick them in the same memory palace, and away you go. So
Wow.
this container principle
I
is
like that.
useful in so many different ways.
It is. I'm glad you have that too.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just a huge part of it. And anything that you were to take, you can memorize just by arranging it, or you can memorize it a lot easier by arranging it with some sort of category, as you've described for drinks.
Thank you.
Speaking of the major, I'm starting to get to teaching that, but I have this book where we're starting with the number shape system first. So
Oh
not sure.
yeah, I like
So
that.
this is the mystery of the
That's great.
magnetic numbers. The advanced version will be the intermediate version will be the major, and then the advanced will be the 00 to 99 PAO. So
Person, action, object.
yeah.
Yeah, I really like the PAO. That blows me away. I don't know if I need to learn the whole PAO though, because I already know my numbers the other way.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, it just depends on your goals and if it would be useful for you. One way
Yeah.
that I think it's really useful is, like you said, genau as a word in
Uh,
German. And when I don't remember that this exactly happened. By the way, for people who are listening, genau means like exactly or what have you. You can say
yeah.
sometimes punkt genau, like exactly on the spot.
That's right.
But let's say, like, I don't quite recall how that I memorized this, which is the great thing about mnemonics. You just have the thing.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Once you
because
learn it.
hard G is a 7, or can be in the major,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
N is a 2.
Yeah.
Well, now you've got 72.
That's
And
right. Yeah.
so it just, whatever image you have for 72, which in my case happens to be the German krautrock band Can, right?
Ah.
So
Yeah.
now we just have the ow part, right? And
Right.
now I didn't do this back then, but these days what I would do is draw in another language, because in Mandarin you can say Jinchang Aoye Dui Shenti Buhao, which means like basically it's not good to not take care of your sleep every night or whatever. But we have this Aoye, right? Genau Aoye. It's not exactly the same sound, at least not in my ear. But I could draw upon that, or you could just have the German krautrock band saying "ow." I just I'm on the exact spot on the stage, and you just use that
Exactly.
thing. So
I
it's an
love it.
that's the argument to use the 00 to 99 PAO just for language
It
learning.
gives you more. Yeah.
Yeah. And
It gives you a lot more. It's
yeah,
faster.
yeah. And I mean, I think it just has so many applications for playing cards. 52 of those can go on a deck of cards arranged in a particular way. And then you just have numbers themselves. It's a little bit faster because you don't have to make up words on the fly, you know?
How do you
Uh,
find enough time during you're so busy with everything that you're doing with the podcast, with the interviews, with writing and coming up with content all the time and putting it on social media and so forth. How do you find the time to do this all?
well, I I don't necessarily know the direct answer without telling a long story, but
Yeah.
I've always I think art of memory helps a little bit in terms of just having an organized mind. So
Yeah.
it's like this thing, and it is in this container. So we're working on this, and that's what we're going to get done. And
Right.
so I just kind of organize my days. So podcast once a week, we get there. Video
Wow.
once a week, we get there. And it's rotating through these different tasks. And
That's terrific.
I sometimes throw myself into projects that are a little bit above my skill level. Like I also wrote an adult memory detective thing, which is Flyboy, this novel. And now I'm writing the sequel, and the sequel is like harder than my writing skill is capable of. So
Huh.
then I have to do like more research and more thinking. So I just put a time aside, like, okay, we're going to do thinking hour about this story that is so challenging and above my level. How are we going to get there? And one of the answers was, well, just take a break from it and write a book for kids instead, and then, so now this gets done. Anyway, I just rotate through different hats. This is a management of multiple artists, all kinds of stuff. It's really just a thing about just structuring time and putting time and tasks in containers like we've been talking about. But it's also,
Incredible.
thank you. It's supported by people like yourself who get my stuff
Thank
and, help
Yeah,
create
for sure.
episodes like this to encourage other people to try these things out. And yeah.
Yeah. For me, the biggest challenge with people that I work with is I'll try to talk to them about the mnemonics. I'll say you can remember this drink better if you do this, and they absolutely think I'm insane.
The best thing I can see is that more of us get together to have discussions about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and just spread the joy that we get from it,
Oh yeah,
because
absolutely.
it really comes down to that sort of thing. Some people, they really love chess. They get joy out of it. So you see it growing that way because they get together and talk about it. Well, I want to thank David again for joining us to talk about mixology and the application of memory techniques to memorizing just an ever-evolving body of information, but also needing to be able to have a solid repertoire of drinks on hand. And this is just a wonderful gift that he gave us to share some of his adventures with that. And, if you want to learn some of these number systems and you don't really feel like you're ready to go into the deep end in some of the ways that I love to teach, because there are many resources for the introductory text. Well, I decided that I'm going to make a introductory text, which I mentioned with David, which is The Mystery of the Magnetic Numbers. Now, this is book 1 of a series, and I'm developing 5 in total. And they are for kids, but they're also for adults who want to learn these number systems. And, I've worked out a way of making this whole series. And I just want to thank everybody who has been supporting this project in order to make things like that possible. And one of the ways that you can do that is if you've benefited from the work I'm doing, come on the show, share your story so we can share it with others and grow an inspirational community of people who are then more attracted to be using these techniques, which is so important and growing more and more important as information overwhelm grows and grows and grows. And we do have some issues where there is a bit of attention span that's going down, so we need the memory techniques more than ever before. So, and if you're interested in Mystery of the Magnetic Numbers and the Memory Detective Junior series, then make sure you are at magneticmerrymethod.com and registered by taking that free course. It's right there on the main website page, and there's many, many articles there for you to go through. And now, this episode with David. So thanks again to David for that. Thank you to you for being part of this mission. Hit that thumbs up if you haven't already and you're on a place that has thumbs up. Get subscribed if you're not subscribed. And if you have any questions whatsoever about these techniques, always get in touch, leave comments below, and we'll get them sorted. And you can also start to answer your own questions by taking action, because stasis, sitting still, conceals, but action reveals. Take action, get results. Simple formula, and that's the magnetic memory method way. So, until we have a chance to speak again, keep yourself magnetic.